I'm so grateful to be with you today. My name is Jeremy Vuolo. My wife and two little girls are coming for the final service at 11:30. I've been here for the four previous services, starting at 6. I don't know if you know, the first service starts at 6 here at Mission Bible. My wife Ginger and my daughter Felicity and Evangeline are with me, and we are so grateful to be here. I've been looking forward to this Sunday to be with you. I've known your pastor for some time now, but getting to know some of you today is very special, and to open the Word, fellowship with you. I'm excited for what the Lord is doing here in Orange County at Mission Bible. So it's really a high honor for me to be here to open God's Word and to preach to you and to hear from Him this morning. So here's what we're going to do. Turn with me to the book of Hebrews. We're going to be in chapter 12 for the first 3 verses of chapter 12, but I'm actually going to take a few minutes to get there, but you can just open to the book of Hebrews, and I will pray one more time, and then we'll jump in and look at a really beautiful and hope-filled text in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1, 2, and 3. So let me pray, and then we'll jump in. Father, thank you so much for your word. Thank you so much for your truth. You are so gracious to reveal yourself to us. Help us, Lord, now that we would have ears to hear and hearts to receive and wills to do. Father, we hear so much truth from your word, but often we're like the man who looks at himself in a mirror and then goes away and immediately forgets what he saw. Help us not to be like that. Help us to to gaze into your word, and to allow that to transform us into the image of Christ. Do that, Father. Transform us into Christ's image by your Spirit, that we would be truly transformed, sanctified, changed, even from the next 35 minutes or so that we spend looking at your word. We ask this in the name of Christ. Amen. Okay, this morning I want to talk to you about goats, and specifically what makes a goat a goat. Now, what do you think the first hour said if I said, what makes a goat a goat? What do you think they said would make a goat a goat? Anybody? You can get a little charismatic on me. Tony's not here, so we're safe. It's a safe space. What makes a goat a goat? One man said a barn earlier. No, I'm kidding. Because I'm not talking about that kind of goat. I'm talking about the greatest of all time. What makes someone the greatest of all time in their respective field? Oftentimes we think about goats in the athletic arena. So you think about Michael Jordan, or you think about, we saw Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone set a 6 world record this week and win gold. And everyone was saying, she's the GOAT. She's the greatest who's ever done it. What makes someone the greatest of all time? Well, there's a lot of factors that go into that decision. But I think one element, which everyone has to agree upon, is it's not how someone begins, it's how they finish. So for instance, someone like Tom Brady, who's the greatest quarterback of all time for the New England Patriots and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, couldn't get a starting position on his high school football team that went 0-8. And he was drafted 100-something, but he goes on to have 7 Super Bowls and be unanimously the greatest quarterback to ever do it. Because it matters how you finish, not how you begin. Well, the same is true for the Christian life and the race of faith that all of us are in as we're seeking to run after Christ. It's not how you start, it's about how you end. And the book of Hebrews was written to a group of believers who had started really well. They had started impassioned for Christ, willing to give up so much to follow after Christ. But now, at this point where they were, things were getting difficult. And many of them were actually contemplating dropping out of the race altogether. They were struggling to keep going. And so this book, which was actually a sermon, which was written down and then passed around like a letter, was preached to Christians doubting, tempted with denying Christ, even apostatizing, leaving the faith altogether. And so the preacher preaching to a people who are struggling knows exactly what to give them. His message is don't go, don't let go, because Jesus Christ is better. He's better than anything that could tempt you or allure you away from him. We don't know who preached this letter, but we know what was said. Jesus is better. And I want to give you a little bit of context before we get to our text in Hebrews 12 about this people, because we're going to relate to them on many levels. This was an audience who had converted to Christ from Judaism. This was an audience who saw Jesus as he truly was, the promised Messiah that had been prophesied and pointed to for thousands of years. And when they began following Jesus, at first, it was very exciting to follow Christ. How couldn't it be? Jesus was this remarkable figure who had burst onto the stage and had made a massive impact in that world. He was a man who claimed what no one had claimed before with any sort of credibility, to be God himself and to be the fulfillment of thousands of years of prophetic ministry. Jesus claimed to be the Messiah. Unless you believe that I am, you will die in your sins. Remember that in John 8? Where he invokes the very name of Yahweh. Unless you believe that I am Yahweh, you will die in your sin. And how often do we see people responding to Jesus saying, no one ever spoke like this man spoke? And then couple that with what Jesus did. Healed the sick, fed the hungry, sat with sinners and cured leprosy. He raised the dead. Jesus was this incredible figure whose ministry culminated in his crucifixion, followed by his resurrection. His credible resurrection as he appeared to hundreds of people after he had been crucified, proving that he had defeated sin and the grave itself. Jesus Christ, this incredible messianic figure, burst onto the stage, and these Christians, when they had first decided to follow Jesus, were excited and willing to go wherever he led. And it was understandably a time of excitement and passion, and it was the thing to do to follow Jesus. And so many of these Christians left Judaism, the Judaism that rejected Jesus anyway, which means they left their families. They left really their entire lives. Their entire lives would have been wrapped up in Judaism. Temple life involved family life. So when you eat and you feast and you fellowship, it was all surrounding the temple life. And those following Jesus would have been rejected by their very families. On top of that, persecution in this Roman Empire was growing. It wasn't quite at the point where they were being killed, but they were being mistreated, maligned, beaten, their possessions stripped from them. And so life was getting harder for Christians. And at first, with all the excitement around Jesus, they were ready to follow after Christ with reckless abandon. But now, time kept wearing on. And now it was years since Christ had ascended, and no sign of him coming back. And they began to doubt. They began to grow tired. They began to look back at the life they had left and to think, man, we had it good back then. And they started to actually think, maybe we shouldn't follow Christ anymore. And so the preacher comes along and gives a sermon for these people tempted to return to Judaism, and he addresses doubt and denying the faith and apostasy. And friends, this is such a helpful sermon for us today because it's the same message that we need. We can grow tired, we can start looking around. Is it really worth giving up everything to follow Jesus? And though our struggles might be different, we have the same problem. We're tempted to leave. We're tempted to drop out of the race. And some of you may not be tempted right now in this moment, and maybe you've just been walking with Jesus for a short time. But can I assure you, the temptation is coming. there will be temptations to doubt the goodness of your God and to doubt as you look at your flesh pulling you toward its desires. And the years get longer and temptations get harder. I think of that scene where Jesus Christ himself was led into the wilderness to be tempted by Satan. And after resisting, do you remember where Satan went? It says he left him and waited for an opportune time because he's coming back. And so if that's you, if you're in a season of joy and you're in a season where you say, the last thing on my mind would be any sort of doubt or temptation, praise the Lord, but can you take this sermon and really this book of Hebrews and put it in your back pocket, because there's coming a time where Satan or your own flesh will start to allure and pull and tempt, and you will find yourself tired perhaps and weary and worried and wondering, is Christ really who he said he is? This sermon is for you. And before we jump into some of the text here, I want to give you a note on the pastoral approach of the preacher to the book of Hebrews. We're just going to look at some snippets in the book, but this whole thing as a sermon is a very pastoral sermon because the preacher comes along and he doesn't look down on these people and say, you fools, don't you know better? Don't you know who Jesus is? Why would you ever doubt him and leave him? Foolish people, come on, get it together. No. He comes to them and he says, I understand. And in fact, Christ himself understands the struggle. Remember in chapter 4? We don't have a high priest who has not been tempted. We have a high priest who's sympathetic with you in every temptation, even your temptations of abandonment. Jesus understands because he was tempted like us in every way, yet without sin. So because he endured, you endure. I can tell you this, I don't know what you're going through or have been through or will go through, but it's not greater than the temptations even Jesus himself endured when he stared down the double-barrel shotgun of execution. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, he said to his Father, Father, if possible, let this cup pass from me. But if not, your will, not mine, be done. Christ is there with you. And so the preacher comes along to a struggling people, and he doesn't speak down to them. He comes alongside them. But he has an answer for them. Jesus is better than anything that could allure you away. And just another note, as sympathetic as he is and compassionate as a preacher, he's not unserious. The preacher lets them know what will happen if they do abandon Christ, and it's destruction of their souls. And so we have this gripping sermon, and that's actually, I want to bring you to chapter 10 to start this morning, just for a minute before we get to chapter 12, because I just want to illustrate everything I've been saying about what the preacher's doing for this congregation. Look at chapter 10 and begin in verse 32. He says this, recall the former days when, after you were enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings. He's reminding them, remember when you began this race, you were ready to endure to the end. Verse 33, sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction, and sometimes being partners with those so treated. For you had compassion on those in prison, and you joyfully accepted the plundering of your property, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession and an abiding one. Therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward. See what he's doing? He's reminding them, you started so well. You were ready to engage the suffering. Remember those days? Keep going now. And look at verse 39, what he reminds them of. We are not those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. He is encouraging, he's pastoral, and he wants to bolster their faith. They're actually thinking about giving up on Jesus, and he says, that's not who you are. You're in the family of faith. Don't you know who you are? Sinclair Ferguson once said that pastoral ministry is so often simply reminding people who they are. Don't you know who you are, Christian? You're of those who have faith. Now, just a moment on faith. Faith is very simple. Sometimes we complicate it in our minds. If you don't have faith in Christ this morning, if you're curious about what it means to have faith, faith is very simple. It's this. Faith is believing God. Now, I didn't say believing in God, though that's required, but even the demons believe in God, and they hate him. Faith is believing God. As one man said, it's believing that his saying is his doing. What God says, he does. What God says is true. And so faith begins with believing God about God. When he reveals himself on the pages of Scripture that he is who he is, we believe that about him, that he is our authority because he's our creator. And he's not only our sovereign, powerful creator, he is good, which is a beautiful component of the reality of God. Not only are we required to submit to him, it is for our good and flourishing to obey him. But it also means that when God speaks about you and me, we believe him there as well. That we are sinners who've fallen short of his glory and have incurred his just indignation. But it also means that we believe what he has said about salvation. That he has taken upon himself by coming into this world to live the life we couldn't, to die the death we deserve, to defeat death and sin itself by conquering the grave. We can have eternal life if we put our faith, our trust in his Son, Jesus Christ. It's believing God. And everything else I didn't mention on the pages of Scripture. Faith is simply believing that if he said it, he will do it. And the preacher is saying, friends, you're of the family of faith. You're not of the family that shrinks back and is destroyed. You're the family that continues. You're like Abel and Abraham and Rahab and Noah and Jacob and Moses. That's why in chapter 11, we call chapter 11 in Hebrews the Hall of Faith. Because what the preacher does, he says, can I remind you the family you're a part of? And then he runs through church history and says, you're the same family as Moses. You're the same family as Rahab the prostitute who simply believed Yahweh and was saved. That's who your family is. What a helpful reminder. What an encouragement. You know, it's kind of like, do any of you dads do this? Where you're like trying to encourage your kids when they're on the soccer field and they're starting to give up. And you go, you don't give up, you're a McPherson. Or whatever your last name is. You know, you're a Thompson. Thompsons don't give up. And they're like, I'm a Thompson. Does anybody do that, or is that, no? You can admit it, I mean, well. But you know what they're trying to do, right? Hey, remember your DNA. Remember who you are. You're a fighter. Well, that's what he's doing. The preacher, it's as simple as that. Hey, you're a Christian. Do I need to remind you of all the other Christians who've endured? Okay, now we come to our text in chapter 12. And what he does is, after walking us through this hall of history, he turns and says, now you and me, therefore us. He changes his sermon from third person to first and second. Look at chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him, who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. What he's doing in these opening verses of the 12th chapter is giving us the fundamentals of endurance. If you want to endure in the family of faith, Christian, these are the ABCs of how it's going to happen. This is what you need to know. And I'm going to show us 3 points, okay, that he gives us. The first, abandon weights and sins. Abandon weights and sins. The second, be patient. And the third, consider Jesus. He wants to bolster their faith. And interestingly, I think it's really appropriate. He uses this metaphor of running. Let us run. That's the main verb with endurance. He wants us to make it to the end in this race. He uses a running metaphor. I don't get running, the wicked run when no man pursues, but it is a great metaphor. Let us run with endurance. Why? Because races are long and difficult, but rewarding. And so it's a perfect metaphor for the Christian life. And I love how he uses this motivation. He's saying, hey, since we're surrounded by all of these witnesses, it's almost like, so I don't like running. I've established that fact. But when I do run, can anybody relate to this? You're running and you're breathing heavy and kind of like, and it's not impressive. You're terrible posture. I'm just like this. But then you see like a car turning the corner. So what do? You're up here. And then you get back down. Can anybody relate to that? You're motivated by people looking on. Well, what the preacher's saying is, can you just imagine if everyone you love and know and admire and respect is lining the side? We're surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses. Moses is watching you, and Abraham is looking on. So can't you run? And he's doing that to make you motivated to say, yes, I can follow. And ultimately, he's going to say Christ. Christ is the one there. This sermon should bolster your resolve, Christian, to live for Christ and to endure to the end. That's the preacher's aim. Okay, how? How will we do that? 3 pieces of advice. Let's look first, abandon weights and sins. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. Real quick, another reason why I don't like running, the shorts are too short. But there's a reason for that. Because nobody's winning races wearing Timberlands and sweatpants, right? In fact, in ancient Grecian culture, when the Olympics began and competition was fierce, and sometimes I think we forget this, the scriptures, they were people like us who loved to go to sporting events and entertain themselves watching runners and athletics, and they would actually perform naked most events because they know that weight brings you down. And so if you're going to endure, if you're going to run fast, you need all encumbrances removed. And so the preacher says, he mentions 2 weights and sins. Weight is crucial in a race. I mentioned Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone this week, a solid believer, giving glory to the Lord during the Olympics. It's beautiful to see. And she just won gold in the 400-meter hurdle and set another world record. She's broken the world record, I think, 6 times in the last 3 years, is it? And they were all her own record. She just keeps breaking them. And it was interesting to me because the announcers were saying things like, she smashed it. And I'm thinking, I don't think going from 50.6 seconds to 50.3 seconds is my definition of smashing a record. But in that world it is. Because races are about milliseconds, inches, and weight matters. The race of faith requires us to shed all encumbrances. Now, sin, I think, is obvious, right? If you hold on to and nurse and coddle and love your sin, you will not make it. And I understand election and the perseverance of the saints. But it was Jesus who said, pluck out your eye and cut off your hand if it causes you to stumble. For it is better to enter heaven with one hand than to go to hell with both hands intact. What Christ was doing there is warning us, if you love your sin and you coddle your sin, your end is destruction. And you can't use God's sovereignty and election as an excuse. Well, I've been elect. His response will be, you will prove yourself lost by your relationship with sin. Now, let me clarify what I mean by that. Christians sin. Amen? At least the ones down in Los Angeles. I don't know about Orange County. The difference between an unbeliever and a believer isn't necessarily the sin, it's your relationship with the sin. See, the unbeliever loves their sin, and they live for their sin, and they want to get away with their sin, even in religious settings. There may be some of you here who you're loving your sin, and you're glad no one knows, and you're glad to keep it that way, and you're prepared to keep that sin living in the closet of your heart for as long as possible, and as no one knows, and you'll put on a show, but you love that sin. That's how an unbeliever treats their sin. A believer also has sin and battles sin, but that's precisely it. It's a battle. They hate their sin. And so as it's exposed, there's confession and repentance. We're called believers, right? We might as well be called repenters, because the Christian life is a life of confession, of seeing your sin and saying, Lord, forgive me for my sin. I've sinned against you, Lord. Help me to put this sin to death. So it's often not the sin being the issue, it's the relationship. What's your relationship with the sin? Do you love it? Friend, if you're in love with your sin and living for your sin, he's saying you're not going to make it to the end. Sin, I know, often seems so innocuous, even the little ones. I recently saw this video of a girl. She was walking in the wilderness. I think it was in like the frozen tundra of Russia, and she found frozen into the ground a little black kitten. It was a cute little kitten. And she sees it, she chops out the ice, warms it up, and it's alive. She revives the kitten. And so she takes it home, and she nurses it to health, and it grows, and it lives with her. But it wasn't a little house kitten. It was a black panther. And it grew to be this massive panther, and it ended up devouring her. No, I'm kidding, it didn't kill her. But she had this massive panther living in her home, and it started so innocent and sweet and cute. Isn't that your sin? Where you say, I can have a little bit of it here, and I'll just keep it in my pocket, no big deal. Nobody needs to know. My parents don't even know. My fellow church members don't even know. Those in the small group I lead have no idea. Friend, that sin will grow. And the preacher's warning them, if you feed and love and live for that sin, you won't make it to the end, because runners don't make it to the end of the race with encumbrances around their neck. Now, weights, on the other hand, are a little less obvious, aren't they? Because sin is clear, repent of it. But weights, often something perfectly innocent and harmless, but it weighs you down in your pursuit of Christ. Now, I don't want this to be a call to some pietistic show-off of religion, like, you can enjoy entertainment, but me, I don't entertain myself. It's a weight for me. Okay, I mean, I'm not calling you to some show of hyper-spirituality. What the preacher's calling us to is a genuine examination of our heart, where we say, Lord, please show me what in my life, even good things, are holding me back from a whole-souled, holistic pursuit of loving you. Does that make sense? And it doesn't need to be this grand show of, I no longer, I've sold my vehicle and I'm now taking the bus. It was a distraction for me, or whatever. Our hearts can be so externally focused. It's a genuine call, Lord, please show me what's holding me back. Maybe it's in the aspect of just faithfully serving in the church. Maybe you have other priorities, and maybe the Lord's saying, you know what? It's time to give up some of those priorities and be fully involved at Mission Bible, serving and giving your time and energy there. I can't tell you what those weights are, and neither can probably the person sitting next to you, because weights aren't sin. But in your life, they're holding you back. Does that make sense? And so that requires you to ask the Lord, search me and know me and show me what's holding me back, what's keeping me as a distraction from trusting God. It might be scrolling on the phone. Whatever it is, Lord, help me to be less distracted and more focused on you. So that's the first piece of advice, abandon weights and sin. Secondly, notice how many times he talks about endurance. Run with endurance, the end of verse 1. Middle of verse 2, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. Beginning of verse 3, consider him who endured. The second piece of advice is be patient. Have endurance. There's always a runner who shoots out the gate, right? And then doesn't have the energy to complete it. And what the preacher's saying is, you've been excited to hear of Jesus? Great. You signed up for the life of discipleship? Wonderful. But you've got to be patient, and you've got to understand that this life is long, this life is often hard, and we are not promised that this life will be difficulty-free. You've got to endure with patience. Remember, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to move to the third point, but this patience is going to come out of the third point, which is consider Jesus. How can we endure with patience? How can we keep running even though it's going on and we don't see an end to maybe the trials of life? Third point, consider Jesus. Look at verse 2. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him, who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. That certainly is the theme of this book, consider Jesus. And really, it's the theme of the entire Christian life. Consider him. Fix our eyes on Jesus. Look away from everything else. So often it is our perspective that allows the floodgates of doubt to open in our soul, because we're looking at the wrong thing. Do you remember Psalm 73? The psalmist says, I know. He begins Psalm 73 this way. I love the Psalms because they're so honest, right? He says, surely God is good to Israel. I know that. But for me, my feet nearly slipped, because I was looking at the wicked. He says, when I saw the prosperity of the wicked, doubt and even anger flooded his soul, because he said to God, God, they have everything they want and need, and I'm suffering, and I'm faithful to you, and they don't even love you. They shake their fist at you, and they've got it good. What gives, God? That's Psalm 73. Until he enters the sanctuary of the Lord. And then his perception changes. He says, then I perceived their end. And he remembered how good it was to be near to his God. The preacher here is calling us for a shift in our perspective. Look up. You're looking here, you're looking backwards, you're looking at those who have it better. Look up. And what do you see when you consider Jesus? You see, what does he say in verse 2? The founder and perfecter of our faith. This is the architect of our salvation. And yes, excuse me, Jesus is the one who designed and established our salvation from eternity past. But the preacher is actually pointing us to his time here on earth, as he so often does in this letter, looking to the perfect example of trusting his Father. He wants us to look at the one who not only founded our faith, established our faith by accomplishing the gospel, he perfected it. He displayed on his time on earth what it looks like to trust in God perfectly. Remember the Garden of Gethsemane again? Let this cup pass from me. Jesus was the one who planned the Garden of Gethsemane in eternity past. But in the moment, in the hour of Satan, in the depths of the valley of the shadow of death, in his humanity, his perfect humanity, he says, is there another way? But even then, we see his perfect trust and faith on display when he says, but not my will, yours. Friends, he's the founder and perfecter of your faith. In other words, he's not in heaven looking down going, come on, what's wrong with you? You're doubting again. He's saying, I was there, and I endured. Follow me. It's the call of a sympathetic and compassionate king. And what did he endure? Look at what the preacher says. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame, the agony, the humiliation, coming down to the dirt to be killed by the dirt. But he considered the joy of heaven and having you with him in heaven a greater reward than backing off of the humiliation. Satan tried to shame Jesus out of the cross, stripped him naked, spit on him, beat him, mocked by little children as they walked by the crucifix. But Jesus looked at the shame of the execution and despised the shame and said, "Shame, you will not shame me, because there is a greater joy. There's the joy of heaven and eternal life and having all those whom I redeem with me there." Friends, he did it. He endured. And why did he do that? He tells us, look at verse 3. Consider him in his endurance. Why? So that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. Remarkable. This was written down to bolster your faith. So are you growing tired? Is life difficult and pain-filled? Consider Jesus and call out to him, "Help me, strengthen me," as your perspective shifts to him in glory and away from the temporal pain of this earth. We have a warrior king who has gone before us, who calls us to follow him. Now, I'm going to close in just a minute, but I think this is such a helpful story I want to read to you from a book I read recently called Everything Sad is Untrue. It's about a young boy named Daniel Nairi who writes the book from his perspective as, I think, a 6-year-old, moving from Iran to Oklahoma. And he tells of his travels from Persia to the heartland of America and the difficulties he faced. He went from being wealthy and a millionaire and esteemed to going to Oklahoma public schools, being misunderstood and bullied and poor. And halfway through this book, he says why. And it's because his sister became a Christian when they were in Persia, and then his mom became a Christian. And I want to close with the account of her life because it encapsulates the heart of the book of Hebrews to us. Listen to this. My mother was a Sayyid from the bloodline of the Prophet Muhammad. In Iran, if you convert from Islam to Christianity, it's a capital crime. That means if they find you guilty in religious court, they kill you. But if you convert to something else like Buddhism, that's not so bad. Probably because Christianity and Islam are sister religions, and you always have the worst fights with your sister. But probably nothing happens if you're just a 6-year-old who converts to Christianity, except if you say, "I'm a Christian now in your school," chances are the committee will hear about it and raid your house, because if you're a Christian now, then so are your parents, probably. And the committee does stuff way worse than killing you. So, when my sister walked out of her room and said that she'd met Jesus, my mom knew all of that. And here's the part that gets hard to believe. Seema, my mom, read about Jesus and became a Christian too. Not just a regular one who keeps it in their pocket. She fell in love. She wanted everybody to have what she had, to be free, to realize that in other religions you have rules and codes and obligations to follow to earn good things. But all you had to do with Jesus was believe that he was the one who died for you, and she believed. When I tell this story in Oklahoma, this is the part where the grown-ups always interrupt me. They say, "Okay, but why did she convert?" Because up to that point, I've already told them about the house with the birds in the walls, all the villages my grandfather owned, all of the gold, my mom's own medical practice, all the amazing things she had that we don't have anymore because she became a Christian. all the money she gave up, so we're poor now. But I don't have an answer for them. How can you explain why you believe anything? So I just say what my mom says when people ask her. She looks them in the eye with the begging hope that they'll hear her, and she says, because it's true. Why else would she believe it? It's true. And it's more valuable than $7 million in gold coins and thousands of acres of Persian countryside and 10 years of education to get a medical degree and all your family and a home and the best cream puffs of Jolfa and even maybe your life. My mom wouldn't have made the trade otherwise. If you believe it's true, that there is a God and he wants you to believe in him and he sent his son to die for you, then it has to take over your life. It has to be worth more than everything else because heaven's waiting on the other side. Either that or my mother is insane. There's no middle. You can't say it's a quirky thing she thinks sometimes because she went all the way with it. If it's not true, she made a giant mistake, but she doesn't think so. She had all that wealth, the love of all those people she helped in her clinic. They treated her like a queen. She was a Sayyid. And she's poor now. People spit on her on buses. She's a refugee in places where people hate refugees, with a husband who hits harder than a second-degree black belt because he's a third-degree black belt. And she'll tell you, it's worth it. Jesus is better. It's true. We can keep talking about it, keep grinding our teeth on why my mother converted, since it turned the fate of everybody in the story. It's why we're here hiding in Oklahoma. We can wonder and question and disagree. You can be certain she's dead wrong, but you can't make her agree with you because it's true. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. This whole story hinges on it. What a testimony. But friend, if you're a Christian, that's your testimony. He's worth it. He's better. He's a better God than you were to yourself. He's a better master. He's a kinder friend. He's a more gracious Savior. He's better than anything that could tempt you or allure you away, even those old passions that well up in your heart. Jesus is better. So, abandon the weights and sins. Have patience like the Apostle Paul, who for decades endured and said, this light momentary affliction. It's preparing for me an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. And friend, look to Jesus. Consider Jesus, who went before you and who's beckoning you to follow. Consider him.